Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the 9th Annual Pacific Islander Violence Prevention Conference. My name is Mateo, and I have the privilege of introducing our next presenters for this morning, along with Hina Namau. And I will be introducing Aiyuko Maun. Aiyuko Maun, whose birth name is Tarmutis, is an advocate and health outreach worker at Monsoon Asians and Pacific Islanders in Solidarity. She was born and raised in the Marshall Islands and moved to the United States in 2010 with her parents and siblings. Aiyuko attended middle and high school in Dubuque, Iowa, where she also discovered that she could speak better Marshallese than her fellow students. She became interested in nursing as a career, but a detour at Monsoon a few years ago has inspired her to focus on. She became interested in nursing as a career, but a detour at Monsoon a few years ago has inspired her to focus on advocacy and activism in the Pacific Islander communities. Aiyuko is a mother of 3 who never fails to impress and to also annoy her.
Aloha and good morning. Danya Albert was born in Pope, Federated States of Micronesia, and grew up speaking Pinjalabs and Popine. She loves to travel and be pleasantly surprised to learn new things on her journeys. Settling in Makokura, Iowa, as a young teenager was her first cultural eye-opening experience. Before joining Monsoon Asians and Pacific Islanders in Solidarity in August 2020 as an advocate and outreach worker, she worked in a nursing home where she recognized the same vulnerability of her Pacific Islander elders as among the residents who were under her care. Danya lives in a multi-generational household that is also busy welcoming Islander guests.
Thank you, beautiful ladies, for the introduction. As mentioned, I am Aiyuko Maun. I am from the Marshall Islands, and I'm one of the multilingual advocates and also a health outreach worker with Monsoon.
And also, as they mentioned before, my name is Danya Albert. I am one of the multilingual advocate and community outreach worker with Monsoon. I am Pinglapis. It is one of the atolls surrounding Pohnpei State, Micronesia. And I speak Pinglapis, Pohnpeian, and a little bit of English.
So, as some of you may or may not know, or you maybe wonder, are there really Pacific Islanders in Iowa?
Really?
So yes, really, there are Pacific Islanders in Iowa, like Danya and myself, and many others who we will be representing today by addressing some aspect of family violence in Pacific Islander communities in Iowa, specifically Pohnpeian and Marshallese, in Dubuque and Makokura. We will touch base on several cultural beliefs and practices of Pinglapis and Marshallese, and look into how healthcare approaches are viewed in our communities. And so before we moved on, we'd like to briefly talk about Monsoon's background and its services. And so what is Monsoon? Monsoon is an organization, Monsoon Asians and Pacific Islanders in Solidarity, or Monsoon for short, is an organization serving victims and survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking in Asian and Pacific Islanders all across the state of Iowa. And we are community-based organizations, and we started in 2003 as a volunteer program, and then finally became nonprofits in 2007, and then finally opened its door in 2015 of 2007. And so all of our services are free, confidential, and focused on safety. And our mission is to end all forms of gender-based violence and to build healthy communities through transformative and social change.
Um, Moving on to our values and work of Monsoon. We are multilingual and multicultural, so meaning all of our staff speak more than one language. And we are survivor-centered and worker-centered. So as we do our direct services, we want to make sure that it is survivor-centered and worker-centered, meaning focusing on the safety and privacy of not only the survivor, but also um, with ourselves as advocates. And so with outreach services, we assist with um, housing, education, jobs, and also crisis advocacy, legal assistance, and so many more. And moving on to, even though through our direct services, we also do outreach and education. And so with our outreach and education, we provide education addressing issues that communities may have, and we're able to talk to community members and understand not only the issues that they may be facing, but also the cultural differences that each community has. And so our youth violence prevention, we have peer-to-peer advocates who organize outreach to address sexual violence, targeting high schoolers, middle schoolers, in central Iowa. And so same with our campus advocacy. We focus on addressing domestic violence, sexual assault in college campuses across Iowa. Legal services, we provide our legal services through our new legal assistant program, which is called Legal Assistant Program for Asian and Pacific Islanders, or LAPAPI for short, as we call it. And so through our legal service program, we assist with filing protective orders, filing divorce. We also help with visa, applying visa, green cards, child care, and child support. Moving on to technical assistant, which is under our program called NAPISEF, for short, or National Asian and Pacific Islander Ending Sexual Violence. So under this program, we're able to address sexual violence internationally, nationally, and also locally. And lastly, we have our healing space garden and gardening for support group and community activities. And down below, you'll see the locations of our offices, starting with our main office in Des Moines, the other one in Iowa City, and our newest office, which me and Aiyuko are at, is in Dubuque.
And so here are the examples of. So here are the communities that we serve, all the regions in Asia, like Central Asians. From Central Asians, we serve Afghani or Kazakhstan, and then from East Asians, we serve Chinese, Japanese, and Korean communities, and also Southeast Asians like Burmese, Cambodian, Filipino, Hmong, Indonesian, and then South Asians, and I'm gonna give also two communities that we also serve from there. Although there are a lot, like, but I'm gonna point out that we also serve Bhutanese, Indian, and Nepali, Pakistan, and then from West Asians, which is typically referred to as the Middle East, and geographically includes the country of Iran, Iraq, Israel, and Lebanon, and then coming down to Pacific Islands, which we also serve all the regions in the Pacific, like Polynesia, Melanesia, and Micronesia, like ourselves, and also API diaspora. And what I mean by this is that we serve any member of the Asian and Pacific Islander communities that are originally from their homeland, but may have never set foot in their homeland.
And so before we go on with our topic today, we want to touch base on the background of NHPI in across US and Iowa. So statistically, roughly there are NHPI 1.5 million NHPI in US and 6,000 in Iowa. And what we learn that the population growth in Iowa has been since 1980s.
As we've talked with communities member, just sitting down and interviewing them to see the reason why they came to Iowa and why they came to Iowa. And so here are the examples or the answers that we've got mostly. As you can see under opportunities, most family members or community members came for education, for better education for their kids or for their children. And then also jobs opportunities, and then healthcare for our families as well. And then
And so those are like the opportunities that first or the early years that community members would come to. And later on, we learned that they would come for family reunions, come for old or new relationships, and also establish churches here. On to our next slide, we want to talk about the macropolitan areas in Iowa. And why we want to mention this is like the micropolitan areas have the meatpacking factories where a lot of Pacific Islanders would like to or choose to go to and work at. And so we want to point out of all the counties that listed in this map, we want to point out that Black Hawk County in eastern Iowa has a large population of Bonafians and also Marshallese and maybe some other NHPA as well. And underneath Black Hawk County, you'll see Dubuque County, where Aiyuko is from, as also a large population of Marshallese. And you won't see it up there, but Jackson County is also located in the eastern area of Iowa, where I reside. And it is also has a decent amount or population of Pinglapis residing there as well.
so we like to before we talk about our cultural expectations, we'd like to also hear from you guys, all of you that are here with us virtually. We'd like to see at least if you can at least share one expectation or norm in your specific NHPI culture. So we'll allow maybe 2 to 3 minutes for anyone to share. So please feel free to comment in the chat below. Would like to hear from you as well. Or you can unmute. Feel free to share.
Hi, this is Cynthia. And I think one of the expectations that I see or the norms in our Samoan culture are like the familial roles. The oldest child is a caretaker in the family. We had a question or a comment in the chat from Carolyn Rollberg. And she said her mother was born and lived in Belle Plaine, Iowa until joining the Navy during World War II and being stationed in San Diego.
Thank you guys so much for sharing.
We're going to go ahead and talk about the cultural expectations in our community. So as a Pinglapis myself and Marshallese, like Aiyuko, here are some of the expectations we've learned within each other's culture throughout the months that we've been working together. And so
So family values, we've noticed that although all these listed down are connected to each other, like um, for instance, being religious is rooted in ourselves, and it is something that we grew up with and adapted these um, cultural norms and also beliefs within ourselves. And then, like, we value religion. And so, like, as for myself, and I can speak for myself, coming from a very religious family, um, I can't, for someone that came from a very religious family, I can, there's sometimes I can show my weakness and I can't speak up or go to any family members or any close family members to even share or express what I'm going through, like mentally or or physically. And so like I sometimes have to like just deal with that, and sometimes I find it a better way to just keep it within myself because I know I know my answer if I go to anyone or my close family members. Because let's say like if I go to someone really close and try to like express how I'm feeling or going through, like I just want to be like heard sometime or for once, instead of just giving out the answers that I already know it's gonna be that I'm gonna get. Like for example, if I say like, oh, it's like hello, like hi, can I like share some with you, instead of like just sitting with me and to hear me out and to also like be there and just to be there to hear me out. I know my answer is always gonna be pray the pain away. Or maybe you need to go more, go to church more. And so this is what I've experienced and what I like to throughout my work. I also wanna make sure that other community members are not going through the same thing as I am, because I know as Pacific Islanders, specifically on Marshallese, we are very religious, and so I don't want any other out there that to go through same thing that I'm going through, and to be able to speak up and not to be scared to talk just because of that mindset that we have, which is not a bad thing. But would also I would also like to like acknowledge that it is okay to seek help instead, or it is also seek to good to seek help and to be able to be willing to express your feelings physically, mentally, and emotionally, and not to be afraid.
And so before we move on, there's a question in the chat. It's asking, how does religious identity look like in Iowa? What are the negotiations or assimilations? So you want to answer this one? The religious identity in Iowa. We just know that being religious is like Ayuko mentioned, it's very like an expectation, right? Like what we said, it's expected in our community or in our family, and yeah, I don't know what to. Yeah. And so, sorry, I will get back to your question later on, but thank you for asking that. And so moving on to, and we just want to mention that everything that you're seeing here in this slide is what is from our experience and is from what we have grown up with. And so speaking from my own experience, Urping Lapis culture, respect is expected to be given mostly to elderlies. And so that's also one thing that we want to mention, that respect, and we can all relate in the Pacific Islander community that respect is number one thing in our culture. And that kind of relates to that gender role of having that most respect to the elder and not women and kids. And so growing up, I know that I have to do all the household chores, and men are expected to be in charge of the house, in charge of the, or head of the house, in charge of the finance. And so we want to mention these gender roles that they are very expected in our culture. Okay.
All right, so moving on, we'd like to also talk about our cultural biases. So, as a Marshallese, all these that are listed down under the category under Marshallese, these are a few of the things that I grew up with and I've experienced throughout my whole life. And so, like, even before when I was still back home and then coming to here, these things were still existed in our household, especially when we just moved here to moved to Iowa, and we lived in a household with the pastor and his wife, and so these were really a big deal within the household that I was at and I grew up in. And so, like, one of them is bathroom restrictions for women. And what I mean by this is that us women are not allowed to use the bathroom when there's men around, especially when there's visitors and with someone with titles such whether that person is a pastor or a deacon or chiefs, like we're not allowed to use it regardless of how bad you want to use it, which is not a good thing from my opinion, and not real and not healthy as well. And so these are the barriers that I've been really dealing with my whole life, and kind of wanting to kind of been navigate my way through these norms. And so other biases that I also experienced growing up is having dress codes. And so um, we weren't allowed to wear pants in our household again because there were pastor living us with us and then also brothers around, and so we weren't allowed to wear pants or anything that's above or that shows our knee, and then also anything that shows our arm or our chest, like up here, and like we weren't allowed to wear these things. And then like the only time that we would always we're only allowed to the only time that we're only allowed to wear these clothes is when we are going to school. And then for the older ladies that were in the house, we're only allowed to wear these when they go to work. And then once we return from work or work, we have to change right away to skirt. Nothing that shows our knees or and so I think these are also like why I wanted to talk about this is to talk about how these things can be impacted our lives, or for us to have like low self-esteem and always questioning ourselves because we grew up with these norms, or I grew up with these norms. So having to dress up casually and stuff like that, sometimes it took time for me to actually feel comfortable to even wear these type of clothes because um, it was something that I was never experienced growing up. And so that's what I wanted to share with you all today to talk about these things.
So moving on to the Punapian side, I listed these two biases from what I've learned from the elders in our community. And so education was always favorable towards men, while women is expected to settle and get married after their eighth grade graduation. And so the reason why I want to mention these biases because it is part of what our elderlies have learned and it has scarred them for years. And so I'm not only representing myself today, but I'm representing the community members from my culture.
And then moving on to our similarities, like respect for elder, which is really a number one thing in our culture, and it's something that we've adapted growing up, and also household labor, like we already mentioned in the previous slide, and then also no public display of affections, which I kind of find really interesting because it's something that I really want to change how communities view it. Like, it is okay to show like love as of like just by holding hands and like hugging each other towards your kids and your partner and your siblings and any family members you're really close to. And so, as for myself, once again, I'm gonna speak for myself because this thing I've never seen growing up. I never seen my parents show affections to each other or nor hear them like talk to each other in some way that I see that, oh yes, they really do love and care for each other because they see these things in my family or in my culture. They see these things or they view it as a very disrespectful in some ways. And so I really want to change this view or how community members view these things because it is really important because as for myself, I'm trying to navigate my way and to change how things works just because I grew up with this thing and so I'm trying to change it just to show my kids when they see me like showing affection, like holding my partner hands or hugging my partner's hands in front of them, to let them know that it is okay. It is okay to show affection and for them to have that or to see that and to show it to towards each other and their siblings and to other family members without feeling ashamed or awkward, having that awkward feelings.
I can definitely relate to Ayuko. I grew up not, seeing that type of affection. And so the reason why we want to mention this is that it's very biased in that it's not being, displayed. And so I want to go back to, I kind of missed on the Ponapean side that arranged marriages for women, if they don't want to settle or get married, they were forced to have arranged marriages. And so, yeah. Moving on to, respect for elderly, like we have mentioned, is very expected in our culture, but it is like mostly towards elderlies. And so, and moving on to household labors, also similar between both cultures, Marshallese and Pinglapis.
All right, so how then do we navigate ourselves throughout these culture norms and expectations that we've been experienced growing up? And so what we've done in the past is doing these community outreach to kind of navigate ourselves within our cultures and beliefs and also values. And so I can let Danya start with this one.
Yes, so at the start of my journey with Monsoon, I had the opportunity to facilitate a webinar partnering with Macokota Public Library to talk about a 1997 book called The Island of Colorblind, which talk about a migration island of Pinglapis, a unique genetic that's common in the Pinglapis community, and how they adapt into the community, and how are they how are their needs being met. So, and moving on down to below, we have the Bonpei Liberation Day, where Ayugan had the privilege or the opportunity to also do tabling at the softball, so annual softball tournament in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So we had tabling where we do button making. On the buttons, it has the inspirational quotes like mental health is first, or supporting, or no Asian aid, etc. And so with button making, we also allow participants to do quizzes about Pohnpei Liberation Day.
Lastly, the other outreach that we've done together is for Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day, which we put together this video with the help of our community members to honor the victims and survivors of nuclear testing that was done in the Bikini Atoll, one of the region in the Marshall Islands, um, during between 1946 and 1958. Continuing on with the monsoon outreach that we've done together in the past was we also facilitated a community listening session or CLS focusing on sexual assault. Although this one was really tough just by the topic itself, and we facilitated this to talk with community members to hear their perspective on sexual assault, and also for us to bring that awareness with our community members. And so, like, although it was really tough to talk about this, we still managed to talk about the barriers in seeking help. And so, like, some things that we've learned from their opinion, or we heard learn from their perspective, is that it is difficult for a Pacific Islander victim of sexual assault to seek help in both Pinglapis and Marshallese communities because we have so much pride, and that is for sure. and that and the other reason could be language barriers for some of the community members not really knowing how to speak language, and maybe experience these issues but are so scared to speak up because they don't really know English. And so these are some of the opinions that we've heard from community members as well that participated. And then, but as for women, it is being ashamed and afraid of being looked down to from families, friends, spouses, or boyfriends. And few of the other barriers that the participants think are the reason for the youth not to not seek help is because they are scared, and fear or being scared of how others would react, and would end up not getting the help needed or advice from anyone. In comparison between girls and boys, when seeking help, participant explains that girls are mostly scared while boys are ashamed. So these are the things that we had to sit down and talk to our community members to, and we also share services and encourage them that it is okay to seek help and not to be scared and not to be afraid of seeking help, because there are people out there that are willing to help and to hear them out, and other agencies out there as well.
And so just to add to Aiyuko talking on our community listening session with community members, like what she mentioned, it's either they were never taught or was just too ashamed to even share about these things. And so that also applies to the clients that we work with. They came into this country not knowing a lot of, or just lack of knowledge about resources, and though they, you know, yeah, they're too ashamed to ask for help, and so they get into this situation where they feel stuck and they get involved with child welfare services or law enforcement, and so that's where we came in. That's where we are here to educate and to break the barriers for that. And so continue on focus group discussion. We focused on talking about mental health with community members. And so when we asked, like, what is mental health? And a lot of them were silent or just don't know what to say because, like, again, we're going to keep mentioning this. It was never talked about, or they know but too afraid to say anything. And like we mentioned in that quote from one of our participants, seeking help is seen as attention seeking. And so one of the outreach that we do with community is the legal clinic. Legal clinic through our new legal assistant program, or LAPAPI. And so prior to our legal clinic, we asked community members what you guys just want to learn about, or what are some issues that, or legal issues that you would like to touch base on. And so we got the housing laws issues, some family violence concerns, and so we also provided resources for those concerns or issues.
And then lastly, as a community health outreach worker, the PI monthly gathering and guided conversation was the very first outreach that I've done when I first started my new position as a community health outreach worker. So I conducted this outreach to facilitate it with just community members in Dubuque and also Makokra to bring them together, bring everyone together to have conversations on wellness and other health issues facing the Pacific Islanders in Iowa. And so this is basically a space for community members to be able to talk about these issues that they're facing and they might be still facing in Iowa. And so we get together to talk about these issues and also these cultural norms that that are affecting our mental health or well-being. And so at the end of every meetings that we have, I share resources with community members alongside with my coworker that's co-facilitating with me, um, which is Maggie. And so like we share resources to encourage community members in discussing these issues that they're facing and having, and to encourage them to go to these resources and culturally specific programs that they are accessible in Iowa and the Dubuque communities and other out there.
Moving on to strategies. So we think these are strategies that are very effective to the issues or barriers that we already mentioned. So raise awareness. So getting to know these issues, learning about our cultural differences, the biases, even educating about these resources that we will mention in a little bit, but just raising awareness within ourselves, not just ourselves, but with community members, families, and also the agencies that serve our communities. And moving on to physical, mental, financial healthcare, I feel, and not feel, but we believe these are very important to have in order to, have what do you call that? Yeah, in order to be stable in life, in order to, sorry,
Like in order to be stabilized in your lifestyle or well-being is to be make sure that your physical, mental, and financial health care is okay. And lastly is what we always do with our community members is to find your resources and be educated with about these resources that are out there, specifically cultural specific resources out there. And we always encourage community members to seek these resources.
yes. So, like Monsoon. So moving on to our last slide of the day, which we want to recognize some of the inspirational voices um, from our community, cultural community. I'm starting with Emily Charquilang, a Ponapian poet. Are migranations guilty of consuming all food stamps, invading all KPTs, mayor rights, and Palolo housings, using all Quest, WIC, Medicaid, and welfare on island? I don't think so. We are burdensome group of more than 10,000, 50% living below, relying not only on educational services, but on social welfare services, healthcare, and safety programs.
And lastly, an inspirational quotes that we got, that we were inspired by, also a community member and also a poet and a climate change activist, which is Kathy Chidangan Kitchener. So we deserve to do more than just survive. We deserve to thrive. And we chose these inspirational quotes because some of these barriers that or some of these issues that we're facing are related to these inspirational quotes.
Right. And so, sorry. And so that comes to our last one. Thank you for participating and for listening. If you have any questions, please unmute or put it in the chat if you will. Oh yeah, we're gonna touch base again on that question from Fatia. How does religious identity look like in Iowa? What are the negotiation and assimilations? I know like being religious or religion in the Makokara or Pinglapis community, it's it's big. Still the same, still plays a major role. I know nowadays my grandpa still wants me to go to church regardless of my situation, whether I need a mental day off or just rest a little bit. But I know it still plays a big role in our culture. There's a question by Sincera. What are the three main reasons of why our migration communities are moving this state, specifically Iowa? And so, as we mentioned before in the background, the opportunities was to come. Well, we have with COFA or Compact of a Free Association, we're able to come here in the United States and have the opportunities to seek education, to seek better education, better job opportunities, and also with healthcare. There's so many resources for healthcare here.
And to add on to what Danya just mentioned, especially now that we are on Medicaid, like every COFA migrants are finally now are on Medicaid and it's more likely like very easy now to access these medical or health clinics that are out there in our communities. And so it is very like it's something that is really a big deal in our community because um, it really helps with like medical expenses and stuff like that for our community members. And there are health clinics specifically for our communities that are helping with their medical issues, and they have specifically a health project for our community members in Makokara and Dubuque. And so it really also helps because they also help applying for Medicaid and for community members to enroll on that. And so this is also why more community members are coming to Iowa because of this opportunity.
And we also mentioned like family reunions. So for my experience, I came here because I wanted to reunite with my parents and my little brother who I never met and finally met in 2012. And so family reunions are also a big thing in church establishments. A lot of people we've been seeing coming to Iowa for church.
How is your community being received by by the other Iowans?
So throughout our work, we noticed that because I travel from Macokota, which is 30 minutes to Dubuque, and so there's a, like I mentioned before, there's a large population of Marshallese in Dubuque, and so some of the people there think that Marshallese are the only PIs or Pacific Islanders there. So,
So yeah, so part of our work is to also talk about all these Pacific Islander communities and also educate them that Marshallese are not the only Pacific Islanders, especially when we collaborate with other agencies in Dubuque and when we partner up with them. We always do presentation not only about our services and what we do, but we also make sure we always make sure to point out that all the community members, not only the Marshallese, but every Pacific Islanders community, and to educate them, to have more knowledge on that. And so, yeah, it was a very struggle in the beginning because it was it became like a common thing that we experience with other agencies.
and that kind of leads to the question, how can those of us as provider CPOs community outside of Iowa help contribute to the health and well-being of our Pacific Islanders in Iowa? So that's a really great question. Thank you. One thing we can do is through, yeah, reach out to us. We got our, yeah, connect and do outreach together. And so our office number is up there. There we have our emails and cell numbers, and yeah, and reach out to us, and we can collaborate and brainstorm some ideas to contribute. To be honest, we don't know the meaning behind it, but it was formerly known as Monsoon United Women of Iowa, and later on, it was changed to Monsoon Asian and Pacific Islanders in Solidarity.
In addition to that, what I've actually learned from our ED of our organization is that she kind of touched base on the meaning behind monsoon. And what she mentioned is that monsoon in the Asian monsoon, there's like a specific season for the Asian communities, and like I think it's kind of like it's called monsoon, which is a season of rice. And so rice is really something that is identifies us Pacific Islanders and then also Asians communities.
Yeah, just one more question. I was just curious. Do you- are you guys able to vote? Do you guys have voting?
So,
No.
as COFA migrants, we're not.
Okay, okay. I was just curious.
Something that
Yes.
we're fighting for. Thank you guys so much for all these questions
Yes, and for all for listening and participating.
and for your patience with us.
Thank you. I just had one last question before we let you go. So, what's the most important thing that you want all of us here today to take away from your presentation?
So for me, I think the most important thing is just knowing us. Just know that we exist in Iowa. And you go ahead.
And also to be able to share these issues that we're facing in Iowa, and not only these issues that we're facing in Iowa, but also the issues that we're facing within our culture and how it can be impacted our lives mentally, emotionally. And so this is like our opportunity to share these with you guys. So thank you all.
Thank you all. You have a nice day.